A librarian noticed a strange smell coming from a book that hadn't been checked out in over 100 years. When she opened it, she began to panic and immediately called the police. In the quiet, hallowed halls of a university's rare book collection, a senior librarian named Margaret Hayes was going about her daily work, surrounded by the comforting, familiar scent of old paper and leather. But on this day, a new, alien smell had crept into the air. It was a sharp, acrid chemical odor that didn't belong. She traced it to a single forgotten medical textbook from the 19th century, a book that had sat untouched on the shelf for decades. When she opened it, the stench that erupted from its pages was so overwhelming, so wrong, it made her gasp for air. She had just stumbled upon a dark and toxic secret from the Victorian era, a discovery so disturbing and so dangerous, it would soon have a hazmat team in full protective gear sealing off the library as a potential crime scene. But before we start our story, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and hit that notifications bell so you won't miss any of our new, incredible stories. To understand the hidden danger that was silently emanating from this old book, we must first travel back to the world of the 19th century, a time of incredible industrial progress and scientific discovery, but also a time of profound ignorance about the hidden poisons that were entering everyday life. One of the most popular and deadly of these was a new brilliant green pigment known as Scheele's green. Invented in the late 18th century, this emerald green color was far more vibrant than any natural dye, and the Victorians fell in love with it. It was everywhere. It was used to color the dresses of high society women, the paper flowers on their hats, the candles in their homes, and most pervasively, the beautiful, floral patterned wallpaper that lined the walls of countless homes in Europe and America. But this beautiful color had a dark and toxic secret. Scheele's green was made with a terrifying ingredient, arsenic. For decades, people were living inside rooms that were literally coated in poison, and they had no idea. In damp conditions, the arsenic in the wallpaper could interact with mold, releasing a toxic, garlic-smelling gas called arsine. Doctors began to notice a mysterious plague of illnesses in wealthy households. People suffered from skin lesions, nausea, and neurological problems. Children, in particular, who spent more time in their beautifully decorated nurseries, would mysteriously sicken and sometimes die. For years, no one made the connection. It wasn't until the end of the century that the true, horrifying danger of the beautiful green wallpaper was fully understood. This same toxic pigment was also a favorite of bookbinders, used to color the cloth and leather covers of books, turning these objects of knowledge into silent, poisonous artifacts, waiting patiently on the shelves. Our story's protagonist, Margaret Hayes, was a woman who lived and breathed books. As the senior librarian in the Rare Books and Special Collections Department of a university, she was a custodian of history. Her job was to preserve and protect the thousands of fragile, centuries-old volumes under her care. On a quiet afternoon, while working in the climate-controlled stacks of the library's basement, she noticed the strange smell. It was a faint, sharp odor, like garlic or old chemicals. She began a systematic search, walking down the long, silent aisles, following the scent through the dusty air. She traced it to a remote, little-visited section dedicated to 19th century medical texts, and there, on a lower shelf, she found the source. It was a single, large, leather-bound book. The title on the spine read, "A Treatise on Human Anatomy." The publication date was 1874. The library's records showed that the book had been donated by a doctor in the early 20th century and had not been checked out or even opened in over 120 years. Margaret, now wearing protective nitrile gloves, as is standard procedure for handling old books, carefully slid the heavy volume from the shelf. The smell was undeniably coming from the book's binding. It was a smell of decay, but not the familiar musty smell of old paper and glue. This was something else. It was acrid and deeply unpleasant. Thinking the old leather might have been treated with a strange chemical preservative that was now breaking down, she carried the book to a well-ventilated examination room. She carefully placed the book on a clean surface. It was bound in a strange, mottled, brownish-yellow leather with an unusual texture, almost like it had no discernible pores. With a feeling of professional curiosity mixed With a strange sense of unease, she opened the heavy cover. The stench that was released from inside was so powerful, so nauseating, that it forced her to physically recoil, gasping for fresh air. It was a smell she would later describe as a combination of powerful chemicals and something else, something vaguely, horribly organic. Her eyes watering, she looked at the title page. There, in an elegant handwritten script, was an inscription. It read, "Bound in the skin of Jonas Wright, executed 1874. The skin of the dorsum. Margaret's blood ran cold. The dorsum, the back." This book was not bound in cow leather. She was holding a book that was bound in human skin, and the smell told her that something was terribly wrong with it. She immediately photographed the inscription and the cover, carefully closed the book, placed it in a secure, airtight container, and made an urgent call to the library's director. The arrival of the hazardous materials team at the quiet university library was a surreal and unprecedented sight. Two figures dressed in full-body, bright yellow protective suits with respirators walked through the silent, reverent halls, their modern, alien-like appearance a stark contrast to the ancient, leather-bound books that lined the shelf. They were led to the sealed examination room where the mysterious book was waiting. Using sophisticated handheld chemical detectors, they carefully scanned the container. Immediately, their devices began to beep with an urgent alarm. They had a positive reading for a highly toxic substance. The analysis was clear and shocking. The strange, garlic-like smell emanating from the 150-year-old book was the vapor of airborne arsenic. The book was literally poisonous. With this horrifying confirmation, the second mystery of the book now took center stage, the inscription. The book was bound in human skin. This is a practice with a real, bizarre, and macabre history known as anthropodermic bibliopegy. While exceedingly rare, it was a known practice in Europe and America, particularly in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The motivations behind this strange act were varied. Sometimes, medical textbooks, particularly anatomical atlases, would be bound in the skin of a dissected cadaver from an executed criminal, a practice that was seen as a way of preserving a piece of the very subject the book was teaching. In other cases, the practice was punitive. The official court records or the confession of a notorious murderer might be bound in the killer's own skin after his execution, a form of eternal post-mortem justice. And in a few, very rare instances, it was an act of sentiment. A person might request in their will to have a book of poetry or a holy text bound in their own skin as a final, macabre gift to a loved one. Margaret's discovery was a direct, physical link to this strange and forgotten historical practice. The police investigation, which was now underway, began to dig into the history of the book and its donor. They discovered that the book had been donated to the library in the early 20th century by the estate of a prominent doctor from the 19th century. This doctor was a well-respected surgeon and a professor at a medical school, but he was also known to have a collection of morbid anatomical curiosities. The investigation confirmed that the doctor had, in fact, used the bodies of executed criminals, which were legally provided to medical schools at the time for anatomical study, to create several of these human skin books for his private collection. While deeply disturbing to our modern sensibilities, this practice was not, at that time, illegal. Now all the pieces of the puzzle were on the table: a book bound in human skin, a preservative treatment containing arsenic, and a dangerous toxic vapor. The final question was, why now? The book had sat silently on the library shelf for over 100 years without issue. What had changed? The hazmat team and library officials began to look for environmental changes, and they found the culprit in the library's own renovation records. Just a few months prior, a new, modern underfloor heating system had been installed in the rare books section to better control the climate. This new system had raised the average ambient temperature in the stacks from a cool 60 degrees Fahrenheit to a more stable 75 degrees. For the other books, this was a good thing, but for this one, toxic volume, it was a trigger. The sustained increase in temperature was causing the arsenic compounds in the old treated human skin to break down and sublimate, releasing the toxic, arsenic-filled vapors for the first time in over a century. The book was carefully sealed and transported to a specialized chemical laboratory for further study and safe containment. Margaret Hayes was hailed as a hero. Her sharp senses and professional refusal to dismiss the strange smell had uncovered a hidden danger that could have, over time, posed a serious health risk to the library's staff and visitors. For Margaret, the experience was a profound and unsettling one. She had spent her life seeing books as sources of knowledge, beauty, and history, but she now understood that they could also be something else. They could be containers of our darkest history, silent witnesses to forgotten practices, and sometimes, as she had discovered, they can be literal, physical poisons. The story is a fascinating reminder that the past is never truly dead, and sometimes its most dangerous secrets are just waiting for a change in the weather to be released.